Many of us in Baton Rouge, especially those on the campus of Southern University, are mourning the loss of Caleb Wilson, who was a young man who was pledging to be a part of a fraternity on campus and lost his life, appears to have lost his life as a part of a ritual for joining that fraternity. And it's been a story that's captivated this part of our state. It's a really sad story. We offer our condolences to that young man's family. Chris Nakamoto has been covering this since the story broke and has been following this story. It's truly sad to think about parents who give their kids to a university. You and I are both fathers, and then to have something like this happen. The details are still being determined right now, but let's talk about where we are.
It's just extraordinarily sad, as you said, as the parent of a child. Like, you send them to school and you expect them to come back. We were interviewing the district attorney yesterday, and he said, you know, when they come back, you want them to come back with a black cap and gown, not leave in a black body bag. Mm-hmm. And it's extraordinarily sad considering the fact that this kid had such a bright future. He was a member of the world famous Human Jukebox.
That's right.
He also was a mechanical engineering student, so just incredibly bright, comes from a great family. But yeah, so initially, you know, we uncovered that there were extraordinary lies that were told in terms of what happened that night. Fraternity brothers had said that he had collapsed in a Breck Park. Well, we started talking to some of our sources, and our sources were saying that's not what happened at all. They were actually at a warehouse. And so we published all of that information this week, and it really is still an ongoing investigation, and is just very, very sad because ultimately there probably will be some arrests that are coming soon.
Mm-hmm. I think it's inevitable. What have you learned about how this is in context with the joining of a fraternity? Now, I've got friends who are members of several fraternities on Southern's campus and in other places, and many of them talk about how this is a bygone part of becoming a member. So there is all of this consternation now over whether or not this is a consistent activity or an anomaly.
Yeah, of course, in any fraternity or sorority, there's always some initiation proceedings. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, you want to weed out who's going to be a good member of the sorority or the fraternity. In this case, we're hearing that this was a long-standing fraternity ritual where these pledges would stand in a line, and ultimately what our sources are saying is they were all standing in a line and getting blows to the chest. And that's when Caleb collapsed, had a seizure, and ultimately after that, they brought him to the hospital. And that's where this extraordinary tale gets told about how they were at a park. Well, our sources are saying there was actually a BRPD extra duty officer working in the park, and he was like, I didn't see anything there. So then that's kind of how things began to unravel. Yeah. And now, as you well know, everyone has a cell phone, and your cell phone can track your every move.
That's right.
They can geolocate where you are from cell towers. And so the minute that these lies started getting told about how they were in a Breck Park and the story wasn't checking out, that's when some of these pledges, from what we're being told, began being identified, and they began giving interviews with detectives, and they told the true story about what happened. And what we uncovered this week is that warehouse that you see right there on your screen is where Caleb collapsed. And so we were there were A through E suites in that warehouse. And so we just did some old-fashioned reporting, started talking to all the people, all the business owners that were there. And some of the business owners were saying, oh, we saw the detectives over at that middle one on Monday. So we went over there, started knocking on the door, and no one answered the door. So started calling the phone numbers that were listed on the screen. And I talked to one individual who picked up the phone, and I kind of got the sense that he knew me, and I said, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. And he said, oh, this is Cleve Dunn. And Cleve Dunn was an open book, and I think he legitimately did not know that this had happened at the warehouse that he co-leases with another individual. And he gave us a very lengthy statement, put out a very lengthy statement saying he was not aware of this until we brought it to his attention, that the warehouse that he co-leases with another individual is where Caleb collapsed.
Well, I read your entire story about it, and I told you before we came onto the show that it sounded extremely plausible to me that, you know, he didn't know and where the building was, and as your story talks about, the father of one of the young men is an Omega on Southern's campus, and it's just one of those things. So where is this story going from here, Chris?
I think what happens now is detectives are just kind of tying up some loose ends, and we're being told by very high up sources that there will be arrests.
Yeah.
We're told multiple people will be arrested.
Yeah.
At minimum, we're going to see a hazing charge,
Yeah.
possibly something tied to the death of Caleb. So could that be negligent homicide? Could that be a manslaughter charge? Manslaughter is, of course, the biggest penalty it carries if convicted, up to 40 years in prison. So it's very concerning for these individuals. And we're told not all of them were Southern University students. Some of them were graduates. So it's going to be interesting to see what level of involvement each one had and who is going to be charged for doing what.
Well, Chris and I chatted about it. He's going to be on the C-suite next week, but maybe even here back on the show, because I would not be surprised if by the time we get to next week, there will have been another chapter of this thing to be told. It's just sad all the way around.
It's so sad all the way around. And when you think about it too, your heart really aches for Caleb's family, because right now the autopsy has been inconclusive. So the coroner's office is doing further testing. Well, what does that mean? That means that his body has not been released to the family, so they can't even appropriately grieve right now. They can't even have a funeral because his body is tied up into this hazing investigation. So we have a hazing investigation now with Baton Rouge Police. We have a hazing investigation at Southern University. And the implications of this are going to be huge for what happens with Greek life at Southern University. As we well know, the Omegas just came back to Southern, and their future is kind of unknown now.
Lead investigator Chris Nakamoto, as I said, we'll have another version of this or another chapter in this next week, and then he's going to be on the C-suite. Great job as always, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Dealing with the trauma of sudden loss is such a huge thing. We're going to talk with a mental health professional about how you can cope. Dr. Christianne Richard is going to be in our segment 2 to talk about that. And here's where you can catch us. Are we doing, sec 3. All right, catch you in just a moment. So let's talk about the impact of sudden trauma. Right now on Southern's campus and across the city, people are feeling the impact of the loss of Caleb. And then there was a young woman, Dylan, who was killed in a car accident near LSU, all within hours of each other. And it got me to thinking, when people have such an unexpected traumatic thing happen in life, how do they deal with it? Dr. Christianne Richard is here. We've talked a lot about mental health. Let's talk specifically about these two cases. Obviously, one is a car accident, and the other one is just, it appears to be a death by virtue of physical trauma. But then you've got parents, you've got relatives, you've got friends who all have to consume this reality. What does a person go through in a situation like this?
I think what's happening overall with those recent tragedies it's like collective trauma. So we're all experiencing, even directly and indirectly, chronic stress, dysregulation. We are trying to grapple with the instability and uncertainty of these events. And so it causes us to not be able to trust in and having a hopeful future. We also begin to just become overall dysregulated with how we are able to process what's going on with our community. We have a lot of shifts happening, governmental shifts. We have the recent tragedies at Southern and at LSU. So as a whole, I think we are trying to put one foot in front of the other. It calls us survival mode. We're not able to make clear decisions. And so in order to deal with that, we have to start talking about it. We have to start making safe spaces for people to get this out. We don't heal in isolation.
Right. So when people hear the phrase post-traumatic stress disorder, it is almost always tied to members of the military and traumas that they witness on the battlefield or in the occupation of being a member of the military. But that is also applicable to the average everyday person who goes through an extremely traumatic incident, correct?
Absolutely.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so PTSD is not just for military. It's every day. We have trauma that gets stored in the body just when events happen and our body cannot make sense of what's happening. So it's very understandable that we would have PTSD when our lives go into uncertainty and there's tragedy that we can't make sense out of. So there's this saying we say in counseling that the body keeps the score. So your mind will try to forget what's happening, but your body always remembers. So that's where the PTSD comes from. So in doing so, we have to create spaces for people, especially because these are collective traumas. They're not just happening to the individual and the families that are directly affected. They're happening to us as a community.
Yeah. You know, obviously, as a mental health professional, you deal with people all the time, and it's hard to ask you to give advice to a huge number of people without understanding what their individual issues are. But in terms of an overall approach to dealing with trauma, is there something you can say for people to recognize if they're dealing with some kind of traumatic aftermath, or if you have children around who are noticing and absorbing the energy of a traumatic incident?
Absolutely. So what I would say on the individual level, to journal. Sometimes you may not have a safe person. You can always write down your thoughts. I always feel that if whatever you keep inside bubbles over in some point. So make sure you get that out, whether that's with a trusted friend, with a pastor or spiritual leader, or with yourself in journaling or going to counseling. Also recognizing signs of dysregulation in your children.
Now, what does that mean?
Dysregulation is when you don't feel connected to your body. You just feel all over the place. You feel disconnected, you feel ungrounded, you just are trying, you're in survival mode basically. And with dysregulation, your moods can change swiftly. You don't have the coping skills that you would typically have when you feel calm. So it's like a state of unrest, constant unrest. So I would say watch out for signs in your children when they start having behavior issues that you hadn't seen before. Even keep creating structure within your homes. So during times like this where it's uncertain, you want to try to be as predictable as possible. So having a schedule, writing out your plan for the next day will help you to feel more connected, more grounded day to day, because each day we're getting something. There's either overexposure to news, violence, tragedies. All of this is making us feel like, what's next? Waiting for the other shoe to drop.
How can people contact you if they'd like to talk more about this?
They can follow me on social media, Christianne Richard. They can also email me at renewedmindcounselor@gmail.com. And also, again, they can follow me on Instagram or Facebook.
So she's going to be back in the future to talk about Pilates for men and this thing she's doing, which I have to hear more about. Doc, thank you so much for coming and joining us. All right, up next, we'll talk with John Kuvion about President Trump's address to Congress earlier this week. It was something. And here's where you can catch the show. We air on the app on Friday mornings. You get ahead of everybody else. But at night, Friday, 7 o'clock, and replaying on Saturday at 3. Well, guess who's back? John Kuvion with JMC Analytics and Polling is here to talk about President Trump's joint address to Congress. It took place earlier this week. It isn't a State of the Union address because it is his first address to Congress since being re-elected. Next year will be the State of the Union address. It was the longest in the history of this country and was quite the show. It could have been shown on HBO or Amazon Prime or something. What were your initial thoughts of the speech?
So I had two thoughts about it. Number one, the fact that I think that compared to his first term, Donald Trump has been much more on his game than he was before. Number two, just the sheer petulance of the Democratic response. In other words, it's one thing if you don't like what he says, but to me they've taken it to a whole new disastrous level, which is even with a 13-year-old cancer survivor getting recognized, they wouldn't even recognize that. I mean, that's terrible behavior.
I know that the leader on the Democratic side did not want a spectacle. He wanted this to remain about America, and I think for the most part the intention of having the paddles versus the screaming was probably their approach, but it made it even more of a spectacle. And Representative Al Green from Texas, standing in the very beginning, screaming something out and then shaking his cane at the president was something that we've not seen before. People compare it to Representative Joe Wilson of South Carolina when President Obama was giving his address and he screamed, "You lie," which I thought was horrible and tacky as well. People are asking about the differentiation between the two. Why was Wilson allowed to stay and Green be ejected? It was mostly because Wilson didn't say anything more and Green would not sit down.
Correct. With Representative Wilson, it was basically a spontaneous outburst, whereas with Al Green, he was basically kind of performing the role of the heckler who, whatever was going on, he felt he had to behave the way he did. And by the way, I would go a step further and say that this was a preliminary test of Hakeem Jeffries' leadership.
Yeah.
In other words, Nancy Pelosi would absolutely not have ever tolerated that kind of behavior.
This is true.
Whereas with Hakeem Jeffries basically taking the tack of, as I interpret it, saying, come on guys, let's please be nice. And he said that in the Democratic caucus meeting before the Trump speech. And for that outburst to occur as egregiously as it did, that suggests to me that he's not going to have a good time or an easy time of controlling his caucus.
Or he should crack the whip, because if the leader, if Representative Jeffries is saying, look, let's keep some decorum in the body, and then you get what you got with representatives walking out, it's not a good look, and it wouldn't look good on either side. But here's a fascinating thing about this, and you and I were talking about it before the segment, and we'll get to both Elon Musk and then the response in a second. CNN ran a poll.
Yes.
Really gauging how Americans reacted to President Trump's speech. And here are the numbers. 44% thought it was very positive, 25% thought it was somewhat positive, 31% thought it was negative. 69% of those polled had a positive reaction to this. If you're a Democrat, that's problematic.
Very.
And so the question becomes, how do you course correct to account for the fact that the public liked what they heard?
I'm going to answer your question with a going back in time kind of answer. Back in 1994, when the Contract of America was the Republicans, and basically what happened in 1994 is Clinton's agenda was so egregious to most voters. You'll remember his approval ratings not only were in the 30s, but he accomplished the dubious feat of not only losing the House but the Senate as well. But in the intervening time between the disastrous midterm and his successful reelection, Clinton basically picked his battles with the Republicans. In other words, on some of the Contract with America items he agreed with, on others like the government shutdown, he fought them. That to me is something the Democrats need to learn to do. In other words,
he rebounded incredibly from that, too.
He did.
Yeah.
So to me, the Democrats' attitude of reflexively fighting everything that Trump is doing is a very ill-advised approach.
I just think it's an outdated approach. It is an approach that has had some effectiveness in the past. It's just outdated now. Listen, you and I are going to talk more about this because there's a lot of local politics I want to get with you about as well. But let me ask you, if you're grading where we are, what is the real nature of Trump's influence now? Is it just about the media, or do you see him as being as powerful as these numbers reflect?
It's a mixture of several things. I think, number one, he knows how to play the media, and the media does not know how to anticipate his every move. Number two, the fact that he has a solid command of the Republican Party now, because all the people like the Paul Ryans and the Mitt Romneys and so forth, they've basically been purged from the party nowadays. Yeah. And so if you basically have a unified party, that to me enables you to do a lot more than if you're doing internal squabbling like what happened in 2017.
They're terrified of him. John Couvion, he's the man. I know you want more Couv. We're going to bring him back and talk more about politics. Up next, OMG. Got the details next. So the C-Suite right now features an on-location episode. We're actually at the Colonel's Club. There's a little bit of a video from us at the Colonel's Club. That's currently on the WAFB app and WAFB.com. And next week will be a conversation with Councilwoman Carolyn Coleman. I cannot wait for that. But yes, if you hadn't been to the Colonel's Club, you got to try it out. That looks pretty good. Sasha's here with us right now. She's the founder of OMG, Outstanding Mature Girls. That looked pretty good, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Don't even ask me. Nope, don't do it. So let's talk about OMG and what it is. You're doing such great. How many years now?
Well, it's gone on 12 years.
12
years.
Yes,
12 years. And
so literally you've had young women come through the program who are now adults.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
How does that feel?
It feels great because these young ladies, they come and they give back. So some of them are still apart. They are actually mentors now, and my daughter is one.
Anya,
yes.
Missing her. She's supposed to be here today. So let's tell people who don't know what OMG is.
So the Outstanding Mature Girls organization is an organization where we teach girls leadership skills, life skills, and value. It actually started as a conference first, and then we branched off first into Kentwood, rural, and then we started making our way into the city.
And so you've done a conference that's taken place at Southern the last few years. What do you have coming up?
So we're going to be, this is our second year, we're going to be at the Raising Cane's River Center this year. And our conference theme is Daughter of Light. And so we are inspiring young girls to just find their inner strength, inner
Beautiful
person,
graphic.
inner potential. Moms are welcome to come this year because we got a really good treat for them as well, because we want them to, we've curated this space for them to just come together and to grow. So it's not just an event, it's a community. And I mean, it's just grown and grown from our volunteers who have volunteered with us since year one, Clay. We have volunteers who, they hit me up and like, we're ready for this year. And just our team that come on board, I forgot what year it was, but there was a year where volunteers took over and they were like, okay, now it's time for you to
Get out of the way.
Yeah. Get out of the way.
That's when it's best, though,
yeah,
right?
get out of the way. And they plan the meetings from A through Z. They plan everything, and it's just great. And kudos to them. Kudos to our volunteer team who just stepped up in a major way.
I love it. Shout out to Sarah Holiday. I know she's watching. If people want to donate to the organization, and I encourage them to do so, how can they?
They can go on our website, omgyouthconference.com, and they can register. They can register for the conference there too, but they can also donate online, or they can send us a nice fat check
She ain't
in
scared
the
to ask
mail.
for it either.
They can send us a check in the mail and hit us up on our social media pages. You can find us doing amazing work on our social media pages. We were on with Hoda and Jenna, nationally on the Today Show. I mean, just, you can find us. If you want to get in
Support them.
contact with us.
Can I end the show, please, Sasha?
Oh, I'm sorry.
All right, give us some money, y'all. Have a great weekend. Alyssa, I hope you feel better. And Kirk, I'm going to come check on you in a little while, brother. Y'all have a great weekend.
Bye.